I come from Bolivia, but we call it Tehuantinsuyo, which is in our original language. We Indians, we have experienced the fact of being stateless since the Europeans invaded our lands and took away our homes and our territories. In my culture, and in many indigenous cultures, in the Abya and on Turtle Island and in the Anahuac, which is South America, Central America, and North America according to colonial denominations. We have made some parallels with Elder Jacob Bovati, and the divisions we have, they are quite similar. We have shared our wisdom for thousands of years. My people have been on the land for about 20,000 years, the same as the Algonquin people. We are a mature culture. This modern experiment called national state has been around only for about 200 years. It's a quite recent phenomenon. And although this experiment has a declaration that is deemed to be universal, there's a claim of universalism there. And it provides two articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Article 14 and 15, by which there shouldn't be any person on this planet that is deprived of citizenship, of belonging, of nationality. Yet, it happens, and it happens by the millions. So something is wrong there. And we as elders, as indigenous peoples that have been around for so many years, we see that this experiment of the Western mind has failed. The system of nation states has failed. And it's easy to see that. If you look at the climate crisis, the energy crisis, the political crisis, the many wars that are happening in this planet, the suffering of my brothers and sisters that don't have state, and other peoples that are non-indigenous that also are stateless. It shows that this project, the project of industrial civilization, has failed. So many elders in our continents, we are getting ready to propose and to foster a new way of ordering our societies. We have to remember, because our ancestors, they knew how to live well with Mother Earth. They respected Mother Earth, and they relate to Mother Earth in humility. We have tried very hard, actually, to accommodate ourselves to the system that was forced onto us, the colonial order. We are attempting to do it so even today. Yesterday, in my country, there was a referendum within the democratic system. So the president was consulting with the people of Bolivia if he could stay for 5 more years. So in total, he would govern the country for about 20 years. Well, this democratic exercise has divided the country, because half of the population basically had voted no, and the other half has voted yes. So now in my country, there is a huge division, and people are fighting each other. And at this point, we don't know what's going to happen. I was supposed to travel to my country these days, but my mother, she's there, and she told me, wait until this crisis gets over, and then take your decision to travel, because nobody knows what's going to happen. In our ancestral times, we never took decisions by competition. Rather, our decisions were made based on a consensual platform. We don't have that anymore. Although in our cultures, we are trying to recuperate that. The way the international arena has managed to build an architecture so national states could organize themselves and they could avoid war following the Westphalia agreements was a result of the vanquishers of the First World War and the Second World War, by which they distributed among themselves basically all the planet. They never consulted our peoples. They never consulted the Algonquin people, the Cree Nation, the Inuit people, the Quechua and Aymara people. They just went to our lands, to our territories, and they imposed a frame of mind. And let me remind you that in my territory, in the Agayala, the rate of extinction was in the order of 94%. I'm talking about millions of ancestors that were killed. When the Republic came, most of the Indian population in those countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, Guatemala, and so on, indigenous peoples were totally invisible. They were invisibilized by colonial rule. And they recognized indigenous peoples as human beings only when they would be taken account as electors. Then they could become citizens. But other than that, no, they imposed their rule over us. They took away our lands, and they invented this word resources, and they thought our lands as plentiful of resources so they could exploit them, they could extract them, and they could become wealthy nations. That has been the history of the relationship between indigenous lands and European powers. Well, we have seen all of that, and we have been stateless for way too long of a time. Up until the year 1998, in my country, an indigenous person, couldn't go to the public university with this kind of dressing, indigenous dressing. It was prohibited in the code of ethics. So we were not permitted to be Indians. We were stateless. We didn't have credentials that showed that we would belong to a state. For us, that's a very peculiar figure, because according to our culture, we are always human beings. Nothing, nobody can strip us from our nature, being human. We came into this world as humans. In our language we say haki, and we become fully humans when we make couples. Chachawari, we say in our language. At that point in time, we are able to have a family, and then that family eventually is able to have a community that we call Ailu, and the Ailu can become a bigger community, which is called Barca, and the denomination goes on and on until we have a big country which we call Suyo. But the important thing there is that we are never devoid of our being humans. Or we can never, it's unthinkable in our terms to be stateless. Today, as I was coming to this conference, you know that the roads are very slippery. So, and I had a stroke a few years ago, so I walk with a cane. So I was trying to make it to the conference through my backyard, and I fell. And I couldn't get up back on my feet because it was so slippery. And you know, in those tiny moments, I felt like a stateless person, not being able to walk, falling all the time, not being able to grab onto anything to be on my foot again. And that's the feeling stateless people have. I've talked with some stateless people, like Lipa, for instance. I have talked with many Indians, my brothers and sisters, and they have the same feeling. They couldn't grab onto anything because it was like they were living in a vacuum of existence. And for us, that's something that is totally unthinkable. There was another term that was concocted during the colonial time that was self-determination. I asked, self-determination in relation to what? In relation to whom? We have never left the land. We still depend on the four sacred elements. We are still dirt, atmosphere, water, and fire. And nothing, and nobody can devoid us from that. So the fact of being stateless, according to an Indian mind, is just unthinkable. I've been trying to grasp this concept from a legal perspective, from a sociological perspective, from an international relations perspective. And I have talked with my brother Jacob about this. And it is so hard for us to understand this, that you can be devoid of your nature, because here the state gives you a nature, gives you an identity. But then when they want, they can strip you from that. That's not moral. So, in our talks amongst elders, we have seen, as I said previously, that this experiment has failed. The fail of having this industrial civilization and the states, the national states that go with it, it has failed totally, and we need to use our brain power. And I know that amongst us, we have immense brain power. We can imagine a society in which we can live well. We can live and coexist well. In my culture, we say sumakhamani, meaning live and coexist well. In my research, I have found that many indigenous nations, like for instance, the Algonquin nation, has also a notion about living and coexisting well. And they say, Jacob will correct me if I say it wrong, Mino Bimadisuen. In Cree, they say Miupinitsu. In Inuktitut, they say Kajarrik. In Guarani, they say Nyandereko. And although they These are different metaphors. These are all about living well and coexisting in harmony with Mother Earth, in which all of us have a place. Actually, we as Indians, we believe that all the voices are necessary to come up with a real picture in which nobody is going to be put aside. Nobody is going to be left stateless. So we need the voices of the white people, we need the voices of the yellow people, the black people, and the red people. We need them all. And it is my wish that we can realize that if we keep on pressing, reinforcing the nation state, we are going to bring our own species to its own demise. We are way into the process of the sixth extinction, but we are still have the time to smarten up and to imagine a world in which all have a place. Miigwech, Yus pagara tata, Yus pagara mama. Thank you, gracias.
Thank you so much, Marcelo, for that very important perspective on our conversation today. It was wonderful. Our final participant on this panel is Mr. Don Chapman, who is a Vancouver-based author, activist, and former Lost Canadian. He was the force behind 7 parliamentary bills to retroactively restore or give citizenship to between 750,000 and 1 million people. He authored the book Lost Canadians, The Struggle for Citizenship Rights, Equality, and Identity, has spoken at Senate hearings into citizenship, and has been interviewed by major media outlets around the world. Dr. John.
Thank you. I'm going to put these right over here.
Sure.
And I'll get to that. Can I take the mic off? And I'll probably walk around a little bit. Thank you. I really enjoyed your speeches. And you talked about the First Nations people. So let me start by saying you're wearing something of importance. I, too, am wearing something of importance. I'll let you figure that out. Maybe I'll tell you at the end of the meeting. But I am wearing something that is very significant. On top of that, you mentioned what it was like to live as a First Nations person. I've got a couple of questions for you, and I'm going to go to a speech that I gave at the University of British Columbia. I started by asking, prior to this, how many people have ever heard of the Lost Canadians? Any hands? Now look around at how many people don't have their hand up. That's an appalling statement. That here in Canada, we have people that are stateless, people that are absolutely hurting a lot of First Nations people. And we don't even know about it. Who failed at that? Why is that happening? I asked a question. I said, are you aware that a bill is about to be put into Parliament that will affect your rights? Actually, it will take away some of your rights. Nobody knew. Did you know that 1 million people could be affected with citizenship, but every Canadian on the planet is in some way affected? Nobody knew about that. I said, did you know that what you don't know about citizenship law can hurt you? No. And then I said, what is a Canadian citizen? Well, how many people here seriously know the difference between citizenship and nationality? Does anybody know? I know you do, Robert. You might be the only one. Well, in one sense, citizenship is the right to have rights. But citizenship is, how did you put it, Robert? The right to participate in your country. But nationality is what we're really talking about in some ways. Because in Canada, going back to almost 1900, they said in the Canadian census that the word Canadian, the word citizenship, and the word nationality mean the same thing. Some countries, like Saudi Arabia, do not have citizens. They are nationals. In Mexico, you're born a Mexican national. And then at age of majority, you get citizenship rights. And in some ways, Canada and the United States have it totally backwards. Because what are we? Are we nationals? Are we citizens? And in Canada, the laws are so confusing that no one knows who is a citizen. Now, I'm an airline pilot. I would never get on an airplane with a pilot if I knew that he had never flown before. But we're sending people to Ottawa to work as our members of parliament, and they don't know anything about citizenship law. In fact, I've been in several court cases. I just ended one, or we just ended one on the Lost Canadians with Stephen Harper, who said, and I would like to quote this one, because this might shock you just a little bit, because Stephen Harper said that the concept of Canadian citizenship and the status of Canadian citizen are creatures of statute and has no meaning apart from statute. Okay, what does that mean? It means that citizenship is whatever the hell he says it is. How does that make you feel? Do you think that if the American Tea Party could get together and cancel Obama's citizenship, they wouldn't do it? How do you like the fact that your right, supposedly, but it's not a right according to the government, it's a legislative privilege, could be just taken away with the next government? What if this government says you're not liberal, you're not a Canadian, you don't have the right to vote? Don't think that didn't happen? What was the first thing that Hitler did when he came into power? Does anybody know? He canceled the citizenship of anybody who was Jewish. Why? Because you have no rights. You have no police protection. You have nothing. You have no judicial review. Donovan said he had less rights than a dog. He wasn't joking. When he wrote to me, there was a dog that had gone wild and had actually mauled a child. And that dog had more rights than Donovan did. Has anybody in this room in recent history lived on $100 a month? Because I know there is one person in this room who has. And that one person has 2 children. That one person was with me when we testified before Parliament a year ago last May. And I wrote a book, here it is. And you can get it on my webpage, which is lostcanadian.com. But in the back of this book is a picture. And it's a picture of myself getting ready to testify before Parliament about citizenship. And the person that was with me was Heather Hartwell, sitting right back here, a First Nations woman. And this picture was taken just after I got booted out of Parliament, and I was a scheduled witness. But they didn't want to hear what I had to say, because I was going to give them a little bit of a different history of Canada, something they didn't want to hear about Canada being a racist, male-dominated country that canceled people's citizenship based on just a myriad of factors, such as even religion, Jewish, Mennonite. There were all kinds of reasons. Women did not have the same rights as men, and in some ways they still don't. But people don't know that. People don't know that the government of Canada canceled Supreme Court decisions on equality of rights just because the bureaucrats didn't like the decisions. Listen to this one. I lost my citizenship as a 6.5-year-old child because I was born in Canada, in wedlock, and I was not adopted. Had any of those factors been different, I would have remained Canadian. Because, see, I lost my citizenship when I was 6 years of age. And I'm going to get into that in just a second, but I want to mention back to that picture. The 5 Conservative members of Parliament that booted me out of the room, and Heather, were from originally Poland, Greece, Tanzania, India, and Taiwan. And they were telling a First Nations woman from Canada that she had no right of a North American identity. Where was the media on this one? Where was the outrage on this? See, we're hearing a lot of stories about other countries, but I'm going to tell you a story about Canada. The original language and adoption back in the 1800s of our national identity were written by pompous, rich, British white men. Word for word, it said, married women, minors, lunatics, and idiots will be classified under the same disability for your nationalist status. And that bill, that language, didn't really come off the books till last June. Shocking? Let's say you're a Canadian woman. You have a child in Buffalo with an American husband. That child wasn't Canadian because the connection came through a woman. Reverse it. You're the Canadian, and you have a child in Buffalo with an American woman. The child was Canadian because the connection came through a man. Now, it doesn't get more gender discrimination than that. So the laws were extremely bad against men. But remember, I said married women, minors, lunatics, and idiots. Well, how did I lose mine? I was a minor child. Married women were property of their husbands. Children were property of the fathers who born in wedlock and property of the mothers who born out. So when I was 6, our family moved to Seattle. My father took out U.S. citizenship. My mother did not count. Nothing. But my father took out U.S. citizenship, so Canada ripped my citizenship up as well. Canada created thousands of stateless children. And then when we tried to come back to Canada, they closed the doors and slammed them shut. Now, I told you I was an airline pilot. Pilots want to know why a plane crashed. I wanted to know why I could not be a citizen of Canada. I wanted to know why I could be a terrorist and get into Canada, but I couldn't be from Canada and get into Canada. I had come from the hardest country in the world to get into Canada from. I was born here. And I ended up getting my citizenship because I had to become an immigrant in my own country. That was really insulting. But along this path, I watched Canada put people on trial. Magdalene Castro Gear was just like me. Her father, and only her father, took out U.S. citizenship when she was 16. When she was 18, she returned to Canada. She made her life in Canada. She was a teacher in Canada. When she got her 3rd passport to get it renewed, the government says, oh, we made a mistake. You're really not Canadian. You lost it because your father took out U.S. citizenship. She said, well, I'm not Canadian, I'm stateless. And they put her on trial in Vancouver to boot her out. And finally, they offered her citizenship, but on condition that she sign a gag order saying that she would never tell anyone what the government had done to her. Joe Volpe was the old citizenship minister. His mother lost her citizenship because prior to 1947, Canadian women who married non-British status men lost their Canadian citizenship on marriage. I have a copy on my computer of Douglas Jung, who was Canada's first Chinese member of parliament. He was born in 1924 in Victoria. On his registration of birth, down at the very bottom, it says, this certificate does not establish any legal status in Canada. So what were the Chinese? Stateless registered aliens. So today, if there is a Chinese soldier who died in World War II, he's a stateless registered alien as far as the government is concerned, because last year I put a petition in the House of Commons saying, when did citizenship start? I want our war dead to be considered Canadian citizens. And Mr. Harper answered, no, citizenship did not exist in Canada before 1947. Well, he's wrong. Because in one of the most despicable decisions ever in the Supreme Court of Canada in 1946, the Supreme Court upheld the fact that the government could cancel the Canadian Japanese of their citizenship. And they deported 4,000 to Japan, 700 of which were children born in Canada. And there were lots of decisions on pre-47 citizenship, but for whatever reason, the government has decided that it didn't exist before then. So that means all of our 111,000 war dead from World War I and World War II weren't really Canadian. So what are we out there saying on Remembrance Day? Now, it's really easy to hear these stories, and you're going to hear more if you read my book. Velma Demerson was not only made stateless for half a century, because, goodness, She committed the worst of sins. She fell in love and was the third woman in the history of mankind to get pregnant out of wedlock. It went Eve, Mary took 2,000 years off, and then it was Velma. And what did she do? She fell in love with a Chinese man, and she was white. So for mixed race out of wedlock, the province of Ontario in 1939 declared her incorrigible. They threw her in jail. Her baby